So today we are in the fourth week of our series going through Esther. And so we'll be reading from the beginning of chapter 4 up and even into chapter 5 a little bit, the first 8 verses today. So today in our story we get to the height of the plot in the story. The author in chapter 4 kind of intentionally drags out scenes to try to pull out the suspense and try to heighten the suspense in the story. And so this is one of my favorite parts of the book. We're right in the middle of the story. In chapter 1, we get introduced to the main theme of the story of Esther, that hope versus hopelessness theme. We get introduced to King Xerxes, who we know very well by now is a horrible person, but the king of the Persian Empire. And we learn about the kingdom and kind of the people's motives and what they're living for. They're really not living for anything. They're kind of just throwing banquets and drinking up and just kind of living life however they want. And then in chapter 2, we get introduced to the main characters, Mordecai and Esther. And if chapter 1 leaves us feeling hopeless, Mordecai and Esther give us a little bit of hope. We learn that both of these characters have very strong character. They are good people. Good people do still exist. And then Mordecai adopts Esther. Mordecai is his daughter. And the king seeks out for a new queen. And Esther's selected to be one of the new people to go in to potentially be the new queen. And so she goes through a year full of beauty treatments and then is finally selected as the new queen. And then last week in chapter 3, we're introduced to the main antagonist, the evil villain, Haman. And Haman tries to, he actually gets away with this new edict that all the Jews will be murdered. And so if you remember, Haman and Mordecai hate each other because of a deep family issue, right? And so he decides he doesn't just want to kill Mordecai, he wants to kill all those people. And so if chapter 2 gives us a little bit of hope, chapter 3 throws that all out the window and we're back to square one and we're back to hopelessness. And that is where we find ourselves at the beginning of chapter 4. In the city of Susa, they just received this decree that in 1 year all the Jews will be murdered. And then in chapter 3, it ends with Haman and King Xerxes reclining and having a drink together in the castle. And then, meanwhile, they're doing that, it says that the city of Susa was bewildered. Kind of says something about their leadership capabilities. But anyways, let's pick up our story. Esther chapter 4, verse 1. Let's read the first 3 verses here. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Mordecai, it says at the beginning, it says Mordecai learned of all that had been done. He's talking about, he just learned about the edict that Haman sent out, that all the Jews were going to be murdered. And so his reaction is kind of weird. I mean, it says he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. So what is that? So in ancient times, this is a pretty normal response. And so basically what it means when it says he put on sackcloth, I mean, if you can think of just a sack, just like a straw sack, you basically wear that. It's almost like a dress, kind of, because covers you. You're wearing a sack, and then you like rub ashes on your forehead and your face. And so that's kind of what it's talking about. So basically, this would happen in times of mourning, in times of hard times. And so we actually see this action performed in the story of Jonah. In chapter 3 of Jonah, Jonah goes to the Ninevites, and he tells them that in 40 days that their city will be destroyed. And this is how the king responds in verse 6. It says, when Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself in sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. So we see the king of Nineveh, the king, putting on a sack and ashes in the anticipation of a disaster. And just like Mordecai is doing in anticipation of a disaster, he's mourning. He's putting on this sack and ashes to try to do anything he can to prevent this horrible disaster from happening. Anything he can. And if you look at verse 3 of Esther, it says there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing, it says. The author of Esther does this quite a bit whenever he uses three descriptive words back to back to back to kind of pull out the really just how dramatic of a time this is. And so we see in chapter 3 when Haman made the decree, it said to destroy, kill, and annihilate. He could have just said to kill, but no, he dragged that out. He used three words. And so here we see that again, fasting, weeping, and wailing. It's an awful time. It's a horrible time. So let's continue reading verses 4 and 5. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So here we get a better sense of the reality of how isolated Esther is in the castle. She has no idea what's going on. She hasn't even heard about this edict that Haman set up. She has no idea that all the Jews are going to be murdered. All of her people are going to be murdered. And so Esther finds out that Mordecai, her father, is upset, and he's outside of the king's gate. And she wants to talk to him, but he can't enter the king's gate because he's wearing a sack. You can't do that. You can't look like that going into the castle. And so she sends him clothes as like an invitation. Here, put these on and come and talk to me. I want to talk to you. I want to find out what's wrong with you. But he refuses. And so she sends this Hathach guy to come and to communicate. So let's keep reading verse 6. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of a text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead for him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. So now Esther is aware of what is going on. She now understands Haman's plot to kill all of her people. And Mordecai just told her about it, and he's now pleading, like anything, like we need help, like anywhere. I'm coming to you. Please do something about this. And it says he urged her to go into the king's presence and to beg for mercy, plead with him for her people. So let's see how she responds in verse 10. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So Esther, she's showing a little bit of hesitancy. Mordecai asks for her help, and she's kind of like, I don't know about that. And I mean, I think she's kind of right to be a little scared. I mean, if you remember what happened the last time the queen confronted King Xerxes, I mean, it was Queen Vashti, and then she was thrown out of the castle. And so I think she's pretty all right to be a little scared. I mean, Xerxes is a little bit of an intimidating guy. She can't really just go up and ask him for something like that. It's kind of scary. You guys remember whenever you were little, when you were kids, and you wanted to ask your parents for something, but you just would get so worked up over them, what their answer would be. You just wanted them to say yes so bad. And you were so scared that they would say no. So I remember sometimes like I would really want like to have something or to go do something with someone, and I would get like so worked up, oh my gosh, are they going to say yes or no? And sometimes I would get so worked up I just wouldn't even ask because I didn't want them to say no. And so I think that, I kind of imagine that's how Esther feels. It's like, oh, is he going to say yes or no? But it's kind of a bigger deal here because if he says no, she dies. So that's kind of a bigger deal. So let's see how Mordecai will respond to Esther's hesitancy. Picking back up in verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So do you guys remember a couple of chapters ago when Mordecai commanded Esther to keep her Jewish background a secret? right? You remember that? It's still a secret. And so here's Esther sitting nice and pretty in her throne, and Mordecai's like, hey, all the Jews are going to die. I need your help. And Esther's like, well, I could just sit here and do nothing because nobody knows I'm a Jew. I could just stay silent, and I could just be safe here in my castle. And so I'm sure she thought about that. I'm sure that thought went through her mind. And so Mordecai tells her, it says, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. He says that he knows that she's probably going to think that. Esther's put in this really difficult situation. She could stay silent, not do anything at all, but let all of her people die. Or she could do the right thing and try to confront the king, do the hard thing, do the right thing, and potentially save her people. So let's find out what decision she's going to make. Verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. If I perish, I perish. So she decides to do the noble thing. She's going to do something about it. Esther now as a character has shifted. So Mordecai was seen as the main savior of the Israelites, of the Jewish people. But now that Esther has kind of taken responsibility for helping the Jews, now she is the focus of the savior of the Jews. Mordecai is now a side character. Esther is now the main character of the story. She is supposed to save the Jews. So now we are at the beginning of the climax of the story. Esther has taken responsibility for saving her people. She decides she's going to confront the king. So at this point, let's move on to chapter 5. We're going to read the first 8 verses of chapter 5 and see how this works out for Esther. Let's read verse 1, just the first verse. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. So this scene is like a movie. I see Esther nervously putting on her robes, her royal outfit, trying to look as best as she can. And she nervously walks down this long hallway, and at the end is the king's room. So she slowly walks down, and then she turns, takes a deep breath, and looks down in the room, and there's the king sitting on his throne, and they just kind of look at each other for a moment. Kind of heighten the suspense. Like, what is going to happen? They just kind of look at each other from across the room. And so let's see what he says. Verse 2. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Okay, let's relax. She's okay. We're okay. She's good. She's made it this far. The king has accepted her in his presence. Now what will she say? Verse 3. Then the king asked, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. Great, this is great. Up to half the kingdom. Anything will be given to you. Now say it, say what you want. This is it. This is your opportunity. Verse 4. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Okay. Interesting. I mean, I feel like you could have just went out and just said it, like, hey, Haman is going to kill all my people, do something about it. But no, she kind of hesitates. She doesn't really do that. Her answer is extremely strategic. Esther is extremely cunning and intelligent here. This is a smart move. So notice the wording here in verse 4. Esther says, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Come, King Xerxes, I want to honor you. I want to throw a banquet for you. She's buttering him up. She's trying to get in with him, right? And so it's actually interesting because we see so many banquets throughout this story. So many banquets being thrown. But all of it is Xerxes throwing a banquet to honor himself. This is actually the first time that someone else wants to throw a banquet for him. It's the first time. And so I bet King Xerxes was a little taken aback. Like, what? Me? You want to honor me? Okay, I'm okay with that. So come today to a banquet that I prepared for him. She's so smart. So let's find out what happens. Let's just finish up from verse 5 to 8. Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asks. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Now's their chance. This is her chance to say something. Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. What is she doing? She's had 2 opportunities now to say something, and she doesn't do it. This is annoying. She just needs to say it. I think here again, Esther shows extreme discernment and patience. She realizes that now's probably not the right time. She knows that what she's about to ask is a big deal. And so she wants to make sure that the time is perfect for her to help this question. So if you notice at the beginning of verse 6, it says, as they were drinking wine. So they're drinking wine, and Xerxes asks Esther again, what is it that she wants? And she realizes that it's probably not the best time to do it right now. Because do you remember what happened the last time Xerxes was drinking and had to make a big decision? Queen Vashti was thrown out of the castle. She remembers what happened. And so, the king's probably feeling it. And she's like, yeah, this probably isn't the best time for this question. And so she displays patience and control over the situation, and she says, okay, next time, I'll throw you another banquet. Next time. So now we are at the climax of the story. And we'll unfortunately have to wait till next week to find out what happens. That's next week. So what can we learn from this? I think we can pull 2 main things from this story. One, as a Christian, we're called to do what is right. Even if it's hard, even if bad things may come upon us, no matter the consequences, we're called to not stay in silence, but do what is right. Take action. We're called to take action. Esther very well could have just done nothing and let all the Jews die. I'm sure she thought of that. But in the end, she decides to do what was right and save the day. There was this amazing guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He was a German theologian in the 20th century. Done some amazing work. Has won awards and written tons of books. But he lived in Germany at the time of World War II when Hitler was in power. And so he was living in Germany, and when persecution and some weird stuff started happening, he fled to America. He fled to America to stay safe. And so after a couple of years of doing that, he kind of felt guilty. He felt like he was betraying his people. And so instead of staying safe in America, he decided to go back to Germany to do something about this. He was like, I can't leave my people like this. I have to go and do something. And so he decides to go and join this rebel group to try and assassinate Hitler. He was actually a part of a group that tried to assassinate Hitler. And through some connections that he had, he actually came really close to potentially assassinating him. And unfortunately, he ended up getting caught, and he was thrown in a concentration camp. And he was there for a little while, and on, I think it was April 9th, April 9th, 1945, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was killed in a Nazi concentration camp for being a Christian. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is almost exactly what Esther was facing. I could save my people, or I could just stay here and just be safe. They both decided to do the hard thing. We're called to not stay in silence and comfort, but called to go out and help those in need. I think that's such a good example. The second thing we can get from this passage can be found back in chapter 4. Let's take a look back at verse 13 and 14 of chapter 4. Mordecai is responding to Esther's hesitancy in helping Mordecai and the Jews. Mordecai asks her to help, and Esther's kind of like, I don't know. So Mordecai says this in verse 13. He sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. but you and your father's family will perish. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from the enemies. We learn that Mordecai's faith here is extraordinary. He's begging Esther for help. Anything, please do something. But he says, hey, even if you don't do anything, even if we all get wiped out from this planet, even if we all get destroyed, annihilated, and killed, God is still God. He's still there. He's still God. It's incredible. How many of you have questioned your faith over something so little that's happened to you? Something bad that happens to you, and you kind of just cry out to God, what are you doing? You know what you're doing? How could you let this happen? And here we have Mordecai saying, I have nothing. I'm literally standing in front of a castle wearing a sack, and I have ashes on my forehead. I have nothing. God is all I have. And even if I die, even if I lose my life, I have God. I still have Him. There's something extraordinary about being in extreme conditions. Our faith kind of just comes alive. It becomes true. We wonder why Christianity is suffering in America, but it's flourishing in China and North Korea, the Middle East. In the 20th century, there have been more martyrs, more people killed for their faith just in the last 100 years than in the last 19 centuries combined. It's crazy. More people are dying for Jesus Christ in the last 100 years than the past 19 centuries combined. That's huge. That is some crazy faith. Being able to say, no matter what happens, even if I die, God's still got this. God's still in control. He's still there. That is some crazy faith. I think we can learn a thing or two from Mordecai and Esther. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for giving us hope. Thank you for giving us life. Thank you for giving us joy. Lord, I pray that you would just strengthen our faith. In times of trial and hardship, you would help us persevere. Help us look to you during hard times. Lord, I pray that you would call us out into the world and to do what's right. Help us not to stay in this comfortable little space, but to go out and to interact with people that are lost, people that don't know you, and do the right thing. Sometimes that even just means just having a conversation with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Even though that may be uncomfortable, it's the right thing to do. And that's what you call us to. Thank you so much for just being a good example for us to